right. So if everyone is ready, I am going to open the waiting room. Good luck, break a leg.
Welcome. We'll get going in just a few minutes. So, good evening. I'm Jill Christensen, the chair of the United Nations Association of the National Capital Area. We are so glad that you've made time tonight for the Careers in Gender and Global Health, which is a program then of the Young Professionals Committee and Action of the United Nations Association of the National Capital Area. We are thrilled to have you here with then guest speakers, Lori DePreet Brown and Gayatri Patel. You will hear more from them in just a little bit. Very quick infomercial on UNA-NCA, as we call it. We have, as of today, 1,167 members across the DMV, DC, Maryland, and Virginia. And then weekly, we reach almost 20,000 people across the region. 60% of our members are under 25, so you can imagine how important career development is. One of the nice things and one of the very unique things that I think about UNA-NCA is that we provide opportunities to engage across career paths. So think gender, global health, across generations, and across the full diversity spectrum. Our committees are very vibrant and active. You're in the young professionals and with the young professionals right now. But I encourage you to sample and check out our other committees as well. You're going to find good support always. We're going to hear many tributes over the next few days to Madeleine Albright. She died today. And with that, what I just want to note as we look at women and careers in gender and global health is her role as a leader. She was very, very key about the importance of intergenerational learning. Learning from her daughters as well as her elders and building that together, and particularly then that role of women as we do that. As she said, with an event that she did that was specifically with the Center for Global Health of Johns Hopkins University last September called Women in Global Health, what she said was younger women have to understand that things can be pushed back. Not everything is getting better over time. So we have to be very, very vigilant. And I think certainly when we talk about women and global health, our vigilance is what is so important. We could certainly diverge and look at the United States and where we are with health and women. We're not going to go there tonight. I very much appreciate the legacy that Madeleine Albright leaves to us. With that, let me go ahead and introduce you to Lanice Williams, who chairs our Young Professionals Program. Lanice is a gender integration specialist at Encompass LLC. She's been working in global health for more than 10 years, focused on gender-based violence, sexual and reproductive health, and then disease prevention and youth. And that's been in the United States, Latin America, and the Caribbean. Her work then has been so very important. And prior to that, this work with Encompass, she was at Friends of Global Fight Against AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria. Again, working with the United States government, Department of State, USAID, in order to address things. She's a graduate of Howard University, both of her degrees, as well as teaches at Howard University. So her bachelor's, her master's, and then is also then an adjunct professor there. So Lanice, I'm going to pass it to you. We've got a great program ahead, and thank you. We're glad to have tonight going on.
Thank you so much, Jill, for that great introduction. I really enjoyed your warm remarks, and thank you for reading my bio as well. Good evening, everyone. As Jill mentioned, my name is Lanice Williams, and I serve as the co-chair for the Young Professionals Program. And I also serve as the vice chair of Young Professionals on the board of directors for UNANCA. Not going to hold up you all's time and talk about myself, but really wanted to go in and introduce our phenomenal speakers that we have for you tonight. First, I'd like to introduce Lori DePrett Brown. She is the director of the 4W Women in Wellbeing Initiative at the Global Health Institute at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, as well as her fellow co-panelist, Gayatri Patel, who is the Vice President of External Relations at the Women's Refugees Commission, as well as the Vice Chair of Advocacy with UNANCA. Gayatri and Laura, you both have had an extensive background working on gender and global health issues. I would like to turn it over to you now for you to just tell us a little bit about your work. What are some of the things you're currently doing, and what kind of brought you to the work that you're doing currently? Gayatri, if you can go first.
Sure, happy to. Thank you so much, Lanice and Jill, for hosting this and for gathering us. As Lanice mentioned, I am Gayatri Patel. I'm the Vice President for Advocacy and External Relations at the Women's Refugee Commission. And I'm relatively new to this role. We were just talking about how it's been a little bit less than a year since I've started. But I landed here mainly because of the mission of the organization, which is generally speaking to improve the lives of women, youth, and other marginalized groups who are affected by humanitarian emergencies, which really is a cross-section of issues that I care really deeply about, both about gender equality on one side and easing humanitarian need on the other. And as an advocate in this role, my job is really to work with policymakers, whether they're governments, donors, other NGOs responding to humanitarian crises, to really ensure that the needs and the rights of women and girls and other groups such as the LGBT community, older women, adolescent girls, et cetera, are factored into humanitarian response. Whether it's conflict or natural disaster or some other kind of crisis, there's always a need to have a gender lens. And this really builds off of some years that I spent at CARE USA, which is an international NGO in 100 countries around the world, focusing on international development and humanitarian assistance. So when I was there, I was the director of gender advocacy, and my job there was really to lobby primarily with the US government on issues related to gender-based violence, women's economic justice, gender in humanitarian spaces, sexual and reproductive health and rights. And so really kind of building on and bringing that experience to my new place. But before that, I worked for many years in the U.S. government. I was actually at the State Department for about 10 years, where I worked on a range of issues, including human trafficking, human rights in the UN system, refugee response and humanitarian response, migration, labor issues, a whole range of issues were ones that I really kind of cut my teeth on when getting started in my career. And then finally, one of the most, I think, valuable experiences in my career has been working in the field, where I worked for about 2 years leading an NGO, a small NGO, providing pro bono services to refugees and asylum seekers. And that's really where I interacted on a daily, real-time basis with refugee and asylum-seeking women and girls who were, in some cases, fleeing gender-based violence, exploitation. Some were from the LGBT community, and they were fleeing persecution based on their sexual orientation or gender identity. And so there were a number of issues that I was able to really interact with and engage with in the field that I think were very valuable as I continued along in my career path. So I'll stop there. Lori?
Hi, everyone. Thank you also for having me. It's great to meet with young emerging leaders who want to work on gender and justice. There's a lot of work to do, and thank you for remembering Madeleine Albright earlier. It so happens that I am a friend of the family and have met her and admired her daughters and her grandchildren, as well as her amazing career. She had a beautiful life as a woman and a beautiful career. So in terms of me, I'm in higher ed. I'm at the University of Wisconsin, and I'm, every state in our nation has a big land grant university that does a lot of public education. And when I came to Wisconsin, I had been doing different kinds of global health field work in quality improvement in health and social services, really around the world, mostly in Latin America. But over time, I did get a chance to work in some other regions, which was a great privilege, and I just loved. And at a certain point, I guess after sort of 15 or 20 years, I moved over to higher ed, and I had this opportunity to work with young people in that setting. And it was just a perfect moment for me because it's intergenerational work when you're teaching. And I was able to work on global health training programs, a minor at our college, at our university, and later a major. So right now there are about 2,500 graduates of our programs out, having global health careers. And it's just an interesting thing to ponder when you're sitting around wondering, what you've done with your time. But the 4W initiative that I work with, and I'm also an associate director of the Global Health Institute, where I continue a lot of that system strengthening work. But the global health, the Gender and Wellbeing Initiative is my passion. And it's kind of, I think of it as a social entrepreneurship or an activist, entity within an organization. So I'm trying to change the institution and by creating a circle. A lot of gender equity work focuses on let's help women level up and get the leadership skills they don't have. And I wasn't noticing a lot of women that didn't have the skills. And so it was more, let's create a circle of leaders who can band together and support each other. And just amazing things have happened. So we really do 3 things. We catalyze innovative research to practice projects on a broad range of things, from human trafficking to healthcare, to translating poetry, a lot of life affirming positive things, leadership. So we're not just addressing the suffering, we're pushing toward the thriving for women. And then we try to create a platform for people to have a voice. A lot of people don't have the voice that they want to have. So amplifying the voice of our circle, which is a really diverse circle of leaders, and trying to, help our graduate students get their first grant for their big idea. That's kind of what we do. So that catalytic support for change leaders. So we have this, supporting change leaders platform and these catalyst projects. And it's really I feel like I've arrived and could do this for the rest of my life, because it's always something new and I'm always learning with the other leaders. So anyway, just the summary would be, I spent half of my career doing global health practice and then moved to higher ed to think about capacity building, and being at the edge of that space. So it's really very applied. And that I did not do that intentionally. I wish I had been smart enough. It's just sort of what happened. So I wanted to tell it that way because I know you're here looking for career advice.
That's so, sorry, Lenise, I just wanted to say that that's so interesting that you kind of fell into that career path. I think a lot of people find that they're not exactly ending up where they started, and their goals and their path kind of solidifies as they go down it. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think sometimes people feel intimidated when you have this amazing narrative. So I like to deconstruct it and say, I didn't plan it. And don't worry, if yours isn't planned, you'll be able to create a narrative, at any point. You look forward, but you also can look back and shape it a little. So yeah, step by step. That's true, Jill.
Thank you both, Gayatri. So I know you talked a little bit about your roles and kind of how you got started with your career. Can you tell me a little bit about a time? Was there something about gender and global health from either a personal or a professional experience that you were exposed to that really sparked your interest in pursuing this line of work? And then tell us a little bit about how you prepared for the work that you've done from an academic or professional opportunities. Lori, you can go if you want to go first.
Thanks. Well, this is being taped and I'm not sure where you're sharing it, but I'll be very honest. I think our motivations are often really personal from our life experience. And I wanted to work with young girls who, weren't part of a family system for some reason. I kind of knew that, when I even was going to college, and I ended up doing that through Peace Corps service in Honduras, where I worked with young women who were in an orphanage, trying to help them make transitions and figure out how to, make peace with the past and move forward. And that exposed me to a lot of public health challenges they face, education, health. Those are the things that help us thrive. And so I centered on public health after seeing that. And that, was related, I think, to my family experience, because my mom had that experience of, not of being apart from her birth mother and then getting adopted when she was 5. And it just was always in my mental landscape that there are, people who deserve everything that we love very much, and their children. So anyway, that, you don't always know what personally is driving you, but that got me in that space. And then out of really love for women and girls, I want to do more of that and focus on public health. So I pursued graduate study in public health at the Harvard School of Public Health, which I loved. But I found that it was all epi at that point. We didn't even talk about human rights. In fact, I started with some other students, a health and human rights group, and some faculty loved it and others thought it was very political. Now there's a huge health and human rights center there. So, we were right. But what happened in the middle was I realized I wanted to do something more around values and so forth. And so I did a joint degree with the Divinity School, looking at religion and social change, not from the point of view of changing people's faith, but understanding world religions and how religion really writes on women, and how women can, use religion in the ways that is positive for them and maybe correct some of the things that need correction. And so I had that double training as I went into, trying to work on system strengthening in all kinds of ways, mostly health and social services, and youth services. And I did that for many years. And just to this day, even though I'm teaching and doing all these things, if you looked at the titles of my classes, Global Health and Communities and Child Health and Human Rights and the Science and Art of Change. So it's all what I did all those years translated into, what teachers do at universities.
Thank you for that, Lori. Gayatri?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely agree with Lori that so much of our career spark starts with a personal experience. And I think for me, growing up, there was just something really instinctual about gender equality, women's rights, strong women. I had so many role models in my family and in my surroundings who were strong women. They were not shy. They did not pull their punches when it came to caring for their family and pursuing a career. And so it was whenever there was even a whiff of, well, you shouldn't do that because you're a girl, it was like a red flag for me, even from early ages. And so I knew that I always had that instinct towards gender equality that I very much felt was always going to be a part of my future. But I was really confused about how to translate that into a career. I was interested in so many different things, and I didn't even realize quite that I was interested in the global side of gender equality until I joined a Model UN club, where it was like a door opening in my mind. I was so passionately interested in international relations and global issues. And I really credit, being a 14-year-old and being recruited into a Model UN club at my school, which is why I very much support the global classrooms work that UNA NCA leads. So I think from there, I was gravitating towards law. I went to college. I went to law school straight after, but also knew I wanted to do social sciences. So I did a dual degree, got a master's in international relations while getting my law degree. And I think it is, again, gender equality and women's rights and gender justice was really kind of the through thread that I took into my career when I started as a presidential management fellow at the State Department. And there I was, my first job was working on human trafficking issues, which at the time were really kind of hot because, you were talking about commercial sexual exploitation, prostitution, like all of, some of the social issues around that, both, from a conservative perspective as well as from a liberal progressive perspective. And I was there kind of in the middle of it, going to countries all around the world, working with foreign governments and their legal systems to design, a system around identifying and prosecuting human trafficking, supporting survivors, et cetera. And piece by piece, I think, as I was doing that, I was working more with people who had been in a trafficking situation and who were now extracted or out of that system, and just having that personal the personal conversations that I would have with them, and just that human connection really made me recognize that the concept of gender-based violence was something that absolutely compelled me, not just as a career but as a vocation. I really just wanted to do everything I could with, my career, with my personal time, with as a volunteer, as a parent, to address gender-based violence. And fortunately, that's something that I get to work on quite a bit throughout my career at State, throughout my career at CARE, and now very much where I am at the Women's Refugee Commission.
Thank you for that. So as you both know, last year in October, the Biden administration released its first ever national strategy on gender equity and equality. So I know you both are working really deeply entrenched in a lot of these issues. What are some advantages you see from this strategy being released on how it might really drive us from a foreign policy perspective, as well as the US domestic policy perspective, to really achieve gender equity and equality? And how does this implementation of this strategy overlap with your work? Gayatri, I don't know if you want to go first.
Sure, I'm happy to. So this strategy was a work of art in so many ways. I mean, not necessarily in content. There are a lot of pros and cons about the actual content, but the fact that the U.S. government created this first of its kind, at least for the U.S., kind of a multifaceted, whole of government strategy on advancing gender equality and gender equity. They use that language as well. Was really kind of historic and something that I think that advocates across the gender advocacy community have been pushing for years and years. And so it really felt like an achievement when it was released. I think in terms of content, what I really liked about it is that it centers on, I think, about 10 thematic priorities. And those priorities were gleaned from, you know, a number of consultations, work with local partners, work with advocacy partners, work with implementers and researchers and academics, et cetera, to really hone in on what are the key barriers to gender equality and gender justice. And so those 10 priorities look at those key barriers. It looks at things like gender-based violence, economic discrimination against women, legal discrimination, sexual and reproductive health, and just, you know, general challenges in access for women and girls to the full range of healthcare services that help them lead their lives and you know, give them all the strength and support they need to live. So I think the fact that the strategy exists, number one, and that it prioritizes those 10 thematic priorities is really a positive. And I think the fact that it gives the U.S. government kind of a roadmap, or if not a roadmap, at least a North Star in terms of how to focus its energy. But you know, it isn't done. That's just the first step. I think that there's a lot that will have to go into implementation, and that's really where the advocacy community is right now.
Yeah, I'll share some thoughts. I too, you know, really appreciate, and for me, it was like, it was a relief after, you know, a period of feeling that things, you know, there had been a feeling of backtracking, and now, you know, we have a president that knows what intersectionality means. That's like so big, right? And in terms of the 4W initiative, all of these things that are prioritized are things that are in play or in the conversation. And so it really was validating in terms of the work had been emerging. I don't think there are, and it's okay that there aren't. I don't think that this brought forth new things that we hadn't thought of. I think it very much codified what civil society had been keeping alive, you know, with a lot of hard work and effort during some difficult periods in the preceding administration, and also high level civil servants in that administration who were keeping things alive, you know, in difficult situations. So I felt relief more than anything. I felt validated. I guess the other thing is there's a lot of alignment with what is written in this national strategy and the global UN Sustainable Development Goals. And it doesn't really make very much specific reference to the Sustainable Development Goals in the strategy. In some ways, it goes further than the SDGs, because if you think about the SDG 5 on gender, it's not as explicit about the you know, rights of non-binary folks and the whole spectrum of identities. So I like the boldness of what we're doing in this national strategy compared to that. I understand what the constraints were, but in many ways, it was a missed opportunity not to underscore the alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals. I say this because I know this is a big UNA priority, and our local UNA that I work with, our local chapter, and they've done a lot to advance the SDGs. There's a movement that I think a number of UNA chapters are working on called Cities for CEDAW. And CEDAW is an acronym, CEDAW, that stands for the Convention on elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. And so again, because the US isn't a full signatory, the idea was, well, let's adopt this at the level of cities and, you know, create a movement in that way. So, you know, I think there was a missed opportunity that we can reclaim in other ways. And certainly you can kind of crosswalk this and show how deep the alignment is. Oh, DC for CEDAW is the UNA. Yeah, we're doing this in Dane County UNA as well. So, and I don't know, and I might be mistaken on this point. So I'm fairly certain that the SDGs are not mentioned, or just small footnote, instead of being, we're part of, you know, 192 nations doing this, which is a shame. And I guess the other thing is there's not a lot of emphasis on ways we could be engaging with the Committee on Status of Women. Their meetings happened last week, and big international movements. So we have a lot to learn from other countries as well as advancing ourselves in the U.S. And I'd like to be humble so that we can push things forward for women and realize that and recognize that in our policy documents. So I am just so grateful for this document and its biggest fan, and felt air come out of it. Like I can breathe again. But at the same time, I wish those other elements had been there.
Thank you for that. And as Karen mentioned in the chat, she is the chair for our DC for CEDAW, UNA, and CA initiative. And we are currently doing a lot of work with DC City Council on getting that passed into local legislation here in DC. So yeah, I did want to ask, as you know, we're still in the continuation of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. When the pandemic will end is not sure, but I know a lot of different countries have been talking about we're entering the endemic phase, but we know there's still a lot to go. In what ways has the pandemic impacted your work, especially as it relates to gender and global health issues? And Lori, I'll go back to you.
So I have been very fortunate that a lot of my work has been able to be carried out online. I honestly feel that having work during the pandemic for me was a blessing, because I didn't have my children are adults. So even though they all came home and they worked here, I kind of did have childcare responsibility. I mean, I had other adults helping me and support from my kids rather than having to, take care of them and have them out of school. So because of that, I was very grateful that I could do a lot of work on Zoom. And there was a whole generational leapfrog of learning in terms of how to do digital work that I think we're going to reap some benefits for our global collaborations. And it's already happening in my work. One of the projects that we were initiating in Malawi, we have a weekly meeting, just like your weekly meeting from your team on Zoom. And it's like, more week-to-week contact with field projects than I ever had before the pandemic, because everyone socialized to being comfortable doing that. And hopping on Zoom is easier for people who are all over in Malawi than all getting to an office or physically being together. So there is this silver lining of knowing how to use technology. I have found that with Zoom, it's not, oh, I prefer face-to-face. Zoom is face-to-face. There's other reasons why physical presence matter, but you can be close to someone's face and hear them well and use Zoom. You can maintain relationships. So I feel I feel like it gives me an opportunity to have more regular communications. But I think there is, a lot of what, the shadow of this epidemic is. We're just beginning to see what it's going to be in terms of losses that people have. People did not get to grieve. People lost school. There were differential losses that entrenched disparities, and I would say magnified a lot of disparities. So I'm just trying to prepare myself to be a responder. I don't even think we've begun to fully feel that. So universities, people like me, were able to be productive for all that means, keep our classes going, serve our community, global community partners as well or better. I did some volunteer work for community response that I felt was useful and it was meaningful to me, but I'm just such a small part of it, and exceptional. And white collar workers are exceptional, and most of society was, having major problems. So I don't even like to use the word silver lining. I don't like that word because it's kind of too soon to talk about it that way.
Thanks. I mean, for me, just building on that a little bit, when the pandemic first started, it really sharpened our advocacy on gender equality issues. It was unfortunately a real life kind of undeniable example, demonstration of how underlying gender inequality can really exacerbate the impacts of a crisis. I mean, we saw these really clear and distinct impacts on women and girls when it came to backslides in their economic security, backslides in not just their health as it related to COVID, but also their access to contraceptives, their access to other sexual and reproductive health services. It translated into an increase in gender-based violence. And so all of these impacts were, it was very clear to connect the dots, to be like, there was inequality that existed before that made this crisis so much worse in effect and an impact on this really wide range of people in society. So it sharpened our advocacy. We were always advocating for sexual and reproductive health and rights. We were always advocating for real solutions to gender-based violence and for women's economic inequality. Now it just became so much more urgent and so much more, undeniable that this was a thing. I think it also, in terms of advocacy, it temporarily shifted our advocacy priorities, but then circled back around and reinforced them. I mean, like I said, we used to focus on these thematic issues before, and then at the beginning of the pandemic, we used to focus on these issues before, largely in a relatively static development context, or even in a humanitarian context, many of which were protracted situations. We were all of a sudden pivoting to this urgent, here and now kind of emergency that was worldwide. And so we had to, pivot to, how do we keep the communities that we work with safe? How do we keep our staff safe? How do we, institute protocols for privacy, but also making sure that broader health needs are met. So I think there was a lot of that at the beginning that then circled back to recenter us on some of these other issues. And I think one final impact that I think really was stark is that it slowed down travel, which Zoom has been fantastic, but it's no substitute for being able to travel to some of the places and some of the communities with whom you work. And so not having those kind of place-based contextual kind of experiences really created a bit of a separation or a bit of a lag between what's actually needed on the ground in the communities that we work in and what we're advocating on where we are stuck for a few years. And so I think we're now just starting to reemerge from that cycle and getting reconnected, on a much more, a much deeper level than we have been over the past 2 years.
Thank you for that. My next question that I have for the both of you is, what specific advice do you have for either early to mid-career professionals who's interested in starting in a career working on gender and global health issues? Gayatri, we'll start back with you.
Sure, I've had a lot of time to think about this because you get to a point in your career where you know what you've learned over the path, and you want to be able to share that with others who are forging their own path. I'd say a couple of things that come to mind. Soft skills matter, and I think that there's a tendency earlier in your career to be very focused on academic qualifications or other professional kind of hard qualifications, that degree that you put on a wall, or that certificate or whatever. But I think that over the course of a successful career, you find that things like being able to effectively communicate, being able to build relationships, being able to collaborate, being able to share credit for achievements when it's warranted, and really showing gratitude and humility. I think those are the kind of soft skills that really serve people well across their careers. I think also there's a tendency once you get to a certain place in your career to stop learning. And I think that creates stagnancy. I think every career step that you take, you should really look for, you know, what skill set can you expand on? What else can you learn? What new experience are you going to offer to it and take from it that builds you out and build out your career as a whole and you as a professional as a whole. And I think the final point I'd make is really just the importance of building and nurturing relationships along your career. You know, never a good idea to burn bridges. I think we all recognize that. But there's often kind of just in the pace of our lives, you lose touch with people who you worked closely with early in your career. But I find that it's so critically important to maintain those relationships, and they don't have to be every day, but you know, check in with people every now and then. I mean, Lenice, you and I have a mutual colleague who I consider as kind of my champion across my career, and he and I worked together when I was like, you know, 3 or 4 years into my career, and now 16, 17 years later, he's still championing me because we've stayed connected over the years. And so I think having that skill of building and maintaining relationships in a mutually kind of beneficial way is really important to career success.
Thank you. I'll add to those. I concur strongly with what's been said. And I'm going to, just to be provocative, I'll say the opposite of a couple of things. So in addition to maintaining relationships and being nice, yeah, that's not what she said, but you know, in terms of paying attention to those soft skills, you need to be respected and, you know, eventually loved, but you don't need to be liked all the time. And if you're going to be a truth teller in your organization, there are times you just have to have your own inner resources and know that everybody goes through this, and you have to, being a leader is lonely at times, right? And so have your support systems in place, you know, be authentic, be respectful to others, but don't let whether you're liked on a day-to-day be your parameter for success. You know, it's about getting a job done. Some conflict is part of a healthy team, and being respected over the long haul is a form of love that is more appropriate than being liked, because there's just too much hard stuff that has to be said, you know, and you got to say it, and it costs you something. And so you have to figure out how to, you know, again, how to nurture yourself. The other thing I would say is, like, don't wait. You know, some of the most impactful things I have done were early in my career. You know, you get an opportunity to do something and you do it, and your later things are echoes of that, or magnifications or elaborations. So people won't always see what you are, but sometimes you see it. And there is this time in your life where you're the only one who sees what you are, or maybe like you have one friend that does. But so you have to kind of believe, you know, until it's revealed through your work that, yeah, you really are that thing you know you are. So there's, again, this kind of arrogant confidence you need to have, and then you have to tame it and don't let it go too crazy. So that's another one. Try not to question yourself all the time, and try not to question yourself in a way that keeps you from boldness, right? I think another thing, well, I have 3 other things. One is quick. I think you should journal. Keeping a leadership journal is vital. And something happens when you start journaling, that it's like your pen knows what you're going to say and you didn't even know. And you're like, oh my gosh, that's so far from what I thought was in me today. So I really am a believer in journaling, just for self-discovery and, you know, keeping that list and looking back over those journals. I also think that sometimes it is difficult to be a woman. It's difficult to be a working mom. All these things are very difficult, and work-life balance is difficult. But I just think you just can't face those challenges without, you know, trying to have a mindset of work-life blessing, instead of just work-life balance. It's also like a blessing to have those things, right? That, you know, and so if you don't do that, it's just too hard. And So I know that there have been times when, work-life balance usually means making time to go home and do things with the kids. And I love my kids, and I swear that if they were here, they would tell you I was a decent mom. But there were times that I was just hungry to work, and balance for me was like to go in and do something about work because my kids were fine, and I was thinking about kids in other places and so forth. So sometimes the balance means letting yourself work. Weirdly. And, it's one thing, working a lot doesn't mean working a lot. If it's giving you energy, keep doing it. And if it's not giving you energy, get the rest and restorative stuff that you need. So don't be afraid if you feel like you want to work. That's okay. As long as it's good energy, and your mind, you're doing your other responsibilities. And then the final one I would say is don't, try not to have this expectation that you're going to have one mentor who can meet all your needs, because you're not like a little duck that wants to be a mama duck, right? You want to be you, and there's no like grown up you out there. So it means you kind of need a web of people. And this is very helpful for, in terms of our intersectional identities. And if you're a woman of color and there are fewer women of color leading in global health, like there should be, there's a whole group called Women in Global Health that you should, follow and join. And they have regional chapters. You can say, I'm going to have a cluster of people I go to, and some people I can go for some things, and some people I can go for others, because otherwise your whole self won't be fed, and you can get into this thing. I see doctoral students go through this of, they expect their faculty advisor to be everything for them. And that's not how it is when you're a grown-up. Have multiple mentors so that when they can't, one person can't help you through something, another can. And, again, it's a more realistic way to become the complex person that you probably are. And it's also a way that you can allow people to do what they can do for you. And if they have areas that they can't, then there's someone else that does that. So that's been my formula. And I always tell my mentees, I'm learning from you, you're learning from me. There's going to be things I can't do. Tell me when you need a mentor in another area, and I'll look in my network and see if I have someone who shared a lived experience with you, or shared an identity that I don't, or has an expertise that I don't. Part of what I'm doing is knowing that I'm not enough and connecting you with others. So that's, kind of my philosophy of mentoring, that if you're mentoring people already, which you might be, think about it. And also when you're looking for mentors, think about that. That's what I got so far.
Thank you, Gayatri and Lori, for those really great and helpful tips. And then one last question I have for the both of you before we transition into our Q&A from the audience. Is there anything you wish you would have known before pursuing this career path, right? I think you both have really great career paths and trajectories and are really doing some phenomenal work. But I always feel like when we look back on our career, even when we're very well established and in a very senior role, there are sometimes there are things we wish we would know differently than we know now. And like, what are some words of wisdom you'll pass on to those that are attending the event this evening? Gayatri, I'll go with you.
I think what I shared earlier about career advice would apply. I wish I'd known some of those things earlier. I really, really want to emphasize something that Lori said, which I absolutely agree with in terms of work-life balance. It's a unicorn. I think that the ideal of work-life balance looks different for different people, yet there's so much pressure to achieve it. But I think I love how Lori phrased it of like, you go where your energy is, and there are going to be times when you have no balance, when you're, working 90%, doing everything else with the remainder of the 10%. And that's just how it has to be sometimes. So I wish I had known that earlier in my life or earlier in my career, because there were career decisions that I made that I regret, because I felt that it's what I needed to do to achieve balance. And by and large, it didn't help my career, nor did it help the other side of the balance equation. And for all intents and purposes, was off path from where I should have gone. I also think I wish I'd known earlier in my career that it's okay to pull the plug on certain efforts. Like I worked for a place, I worked in a job that I absolutely hated for a number of years. And the biggest reason I didn't leave was because I was worried about what was on the other side. You know, was I taking too big of a risk by leaving this particular place and going into the unknown? When I finally did, it was by far the best career decision I've made, hands down. So taking that risk, giving yourself the confidence to, you know, it doesn't have to be a huge leap. I mean, for me, it was, you know, leaving the government to go to civil society. It wasn't, you know, I wasn't like moving to Nepal, like on a shoestring. It was a calculated risk, but for me at the time, it felt like a really big risk. And just taking that step, taking a little bit of a pay decrease to be able to do what I love and what I wanted to do, and in a way that I wanted to do it, made an incredibly huge difference in just my life, my career, my energy around what I was working on. I think those are the two things that I would really emphasize to 25-year-old me.
So the question was, is there anything you wish you would have known? So I'm not sure how to answer that, and maybe maybe it was wrapped into my suggestions. I think it's important in a way not to dwell on regrets. You know, like once you make it, there's actually research about happiness that people who are happy, it's not that they, you know, don't make bad decisions or have things go wrong, but they are less likely to have regrets or question themselves. Once you've done something, you know, you go with that decision. And so I do think there has to be, I think here's one thing I do wish I had known. And it's not like I didn't know this, but I think we as women tend to feel that there's one right path, right? And I remember one of my friends saying to me, what are we going to do about like having children? And I was like, well, we're going to all do different things. But it occurred to me, like, there was this cohort feeling that there's kind of one right way to do this. And so I wish I had known that, and this goes along with the work-life blessing taking on a lot of different shapes. I wish I had known how many ways there are to do it right. There are so many ways to do it right. And a lot of things that you think about, you know, when you're making these trade-offs as a woman, you're a lot of times we have a very literal, a literal sense of inputs. You know, we think like hourly workers, and it's not hourly work. You know, some things happen. Professional maturation happens just with time, regardless of how much you might be working or how much you might not be working. And so I think that's another thing, is sometimes the trade-off isn't even real. You know, you can find a workaround that's a win-win, and there's going to be luck involved. So just do what follow your moral compass and do what your heart tells you is right for you in a given moment. And I think things do work out. So yeah, I guess I wish I'd known how to make bread. I learned it during the pandemic, and now it's like this evening thing, and it's so much satisfaction. It's like having elves to wake up in the morning and have my dough ready to go in the oven. I wish I had done that when I had kids in the house to, you know, appreciate it. But there's a lot, and I guess another thing that I wish I'd known is how much having habits that are stable can kind of clear the way for being happy and being, you know, having a peaceful and productive existence. So cultivating habits that are really aligned with the life you want. You don't focus on that when you're young. You're just kind of like making things work. But, you know, habits are like muscle. They're just a scaffolding for you to be able to express yourself. So, you know, looking at your habits tells you really a lot about what your intentions are.
sorry, had a little technical difficulty. Thank you for that, Lori and Gayatri. Now I just want to turn it over to see if any of our members of the audience have any questions that they might want to ask our speaker. You can feel free to put your question in the chat, or you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question directly, whether your question is to both Gayatri or Lori or to both of them.
I guess I have a question for both Lori and Gayatri, going off of kind of a combination of things that you've said earlier. Gayatri, you mentioned a little bit about your decision-making process to kind of pull the plug and take the calculated risk to jump to a different position. And then Lori, you were also kind of mentioning building these habits and kind of finding this balance that's right for you. Could you just dive into the decision making process a little bit more when you think it's time, not necessarily to leave a job, but anything, when it's kind of the, to end a project, or you're going down one route and, Lori, you had mentioned how there's so many ways to do things right. When you decide you're not on that right path and you'd like to switch the path a little bit, what does the decision-making look like for you?
Well, the obvious answer would be, and you should do this for sure, is list the pros and cons, and we kind of know how to do that. But what I would do in addition to that is listen to where you have strong emotions. And if you have a combination, if fear is keeping you somewhere, you need to figure out how to create a situation where what feels like a deep dive into a dark pool is more like a yoga stretch. Like, plan. I'm not saying to be hard on yourself, but get yourself strong, figure out, assess your safety nets, and then push yourself to take a risk. Because if you don't take risks, you're not going to be able to express your full self as much. And then if the change is, if the pull of loyalty, or if it's, I think I would worry about not doing things you want to do but are afraid to do. That's the main thing. And then I think if you're staying in a situation where you have an ethical qualms, that you feel that you're not morally aligned, and I'm using the word moral in a moralistic way, like sometimes we have to be moralistic, get out of that space, because you will lose your ability to be free and have a clear seeing moral compass if you stay in it. So I would just notice fear and notice, your moral compass as bigger guides than money or income or prestige. All that works out in the wash. And a lot of that is driven by luck anyway. And an authentic life, at the end of it, you don't really care what prizes you won, or, whether you earn, of course, you all want to have a decent wage and fight for that, please. But, whether you had a very high paying salary or a fair, good salary is, doesn't make you happy or not. So I don't know if that helps, and maybe you want to share, Gayatri.
Yeah, I would definitely second those two, fear and, moral lack of alignment. I would also add boredom. You have to really be driven by your work. You have to find energy in it. You have to find purpose in it. And if you're in a place where you don't care about it, you don't care about the outcome, you don't care about the input, you're doing it by rote, it may be time for you to leave and find something else that gives you your mojo back. For me, the times that I've chosen to leave a job have been those circumstances where I've either been bored and felt like I wasn't learning anything new or doing anything different, and I was on the precipice of just kind of getting stuck in a rut, or I felt like what I was doing was very deeply uncomfortable with my moral compass, so, as Lori phrased it, or I was just afraid of the other side. And so I think those are three key pieces. The other pitfall that we often fall into is being worried that we're burning a bridge, or that people aren't going to like us, or we're staying somewhere just so that we don't disappoint someone, or if we make someone unhappy. That's a red flag. I think it's very close to that argument that Lori was saying about fear. If you're worried that you're going to come across as disloyal if you leave a job that you're unhappy in, then you got to take a deep breath and wonder, is that the right reason to stay? And is it going to be a fulfilling career for you to stay?
Thank you both so much.
Thank you both, Lori and Gayatri. We are at time. I just want to thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us this evening. Our discussion was really insightful, and I just really appreciated a lot of the really great takeaways and gems that you shared with not only for me, but with everyone else that attended this event this evening. And now I'll hand it over to Najat, who is also the co-chair for the Young Professionals Program, to give our closing remarks.
Hi, Lori and Gayatri. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your experiences, your knowledge. You know, it's just so inspirational because there isn't some kind of template letting us know how do we go about our careers, how do we navigate these fields. So sincerely, thank you. And I'd like to just emphasize a bit of what Jill had said at the beginning of the program with regards to YP. We do aim to help people in terms of navigating their careers, and specifically with the next event that's coming that we'll be hosting, it's with regards to navigating your career in agriculture, sustainable agriculture, as well as just food systems in general. So if you're interested in that, I'd really encourage you to come. Additionally, we have some special speakers. One of them is Shannon Maillard, who is leading the Congressional Hunger Center. And so she'll be shedding insight on the fellowship opportunities there, the internship opportunities there, as well as just the volunteer opportunities there. So thank you all so much for coming tonight, and we hope to see you next time in future events.
Thank you so much. Thanks for organizing, and thanks everyone for being here.
It was great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.